So we want to be able to carry our how many lives we have left and the score we currently have in between multiple levels. At the moment, we're just resetting it back to be whatever basic default we have, but we want to be able to keep going as we play through more levels in the game and make it more of an achievement when our player gets a big score. So to do that, we're going to use a thing called player prefs. And player prefs are a built-in thing into Unity that allows you to store bits of basic data on whatever machine the game is running on. So to do it, what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of values to control all this stuff. So at the moment we have our lives here, which says what our lives are, and we have our current score here. But what we're going to do is, back on our main menu of our game, we have, whenever we start a new game, we want to set it so that our players have a certain amount of lives. So we want them to start off with 3 lives, and we want them to start off with a certain amount of score, i.e. 0. So we want to say on our main menu here, what we're going to do is create a new player pref. We're going to say player prefs dot set int, and what this does, it creates a new number value that will be stored on the machine, on the computer, and the name of this player prefs will be current score, and the value we're going to give it is 0. So we want our player to start off with a value of 0 on their current score. And then we also want to start them off with a certain amount of lives. So we're going to say player prefs dot set int, and this time it's going to be current lives, like that. Oh no, not a dot, we want a comma. So current lives, and the value we want our player to start off with for lives is 3 lives. We want our players all to start off with 3 lives. So that's perfectly fine, but how do we use this back in our game manager when we actually start up a level? Well, basically all we do is go into our game manager here, and at the start function, when we start up the game, before we set up on the screen showing how many lives we have and what our current score is, what we want to do is load up those values from our player prefs that we just stored. And what we'll do is say our current score, so the current score we're using in our game manager, which is the value we're using to show on screen. So we'll say current score is equal to player prefs dot get int. So we're getting the number value, and the name of the int that we want to get is current score. Now it's important, as with many things when we're coding, you need to make sure that you spell it the exact same as we did in our main menu over here, and capitalize it the exact same, or else it won't match up and it won't work, and you'll end up getting an error. So our current score is set just like that. So let's also get our lives the exact same way. So our lives will be equal to player prefs dot get int current lives. Okay, so now we have some lives values for our player. That's absolutely perfect. The next thing we need to do is set it so that when our player loses a life, that his that we set the player prefs current lives value to be knocked down whenever we lose life. And similarly, we want to do whenever our player adds some score, we want to update the current score that's been stored in the player prefs. So we'll go into our where we have our ball being respawned, which is where we're losing a life at the exact same time. And in here we're going to say, okay, at this point, just after we do all this stuff, at the bottom we're going to say, okay, player prefs dot set int, and we want to set the current lives player pref int. We want to set that to be whatever our current lives is, because we know at this point a life has been taken away from whatever value we have, and then we're setting it back down here to be stored as whatever our current life is. So in that way, when we move on to the next level of the game, as soon as that starts, it'll pull the new updated current lives version at the start of that loop. It'll pull it out, and then it'll know if we had 1 life left in the next level, we still have only 1 life left. So perfect. We'll do the exact same down here for when we're adding a score. down here we're going to say, actually no, we won't do it down here. What we'll do is actually when we win a level, so when our brick check runs out, when we know there's no more bricks left in the level and we activate the level win screen, at this point here we know, okay, that's the only time we're really going to want to keep track of what our current score is. Otherwise we'll be constantly updating the player prefs over and over and over again, and you don't really want to be doing a lot of that. It's okay to do it when we lose a life, for example, because we know, okay, we're not going to be losing lives multiple times a second, but we could be getting loads and loads of points as our players are playing the game, and we don't want that to be constantly saving something to the computer the whole time. There's no need for it. So what we'll do instead is just say, okay, when we know that we've completed a level, at that point we can go, okay, set the player prefs, set int, and set the current score value to be equal to whatever our current score is. Perfect. So that should do for carrying over our score between levels. So let's go ahead and check that out now. Let's go back into the game and let it compile. And once it's finished compiling, we'll kill both of them. So we've got our score of 1100. I've got 0 lives remaining at the moment because I just jumped into this game rather than letting it start up the way it should. So we're going to press play, and now we see we have 0 lives remaining and we've got a score of 1100. If I pause and go to the main menu and start a new game, we're back to having 3 lives and our score is still at 1100 for some reason. That shouldn't be right. Hold on, let's just check what's going on there. Let's go to our main menu. Oh, I just realized, look, I spelt my current score wrong. So there we go. If you're going to spell things wrong, that's a perfect example of how these things won't actually line up and work properly first. So if I go back into the game now, we should start off here with our lives being 3 lives and our score will be 1100. Let's let it play. There we go. We got our score because our data is being saved constantly now. So let's go back into the main menu, start a new game, and there we go. We've been reset back to what we should start off with. And now I've destroyed the 2 of them. We go on to the next level. We've got 3 lives remaining. Perfect. So let's just go and double check that it's all working again. I'm going to lose a ball before I win this level. So we'll lose a life. Then see if we can get both of them. Nope. Let's see if I can get this one here. There we go. So now we've got 1 life left. 2200 points. We move on and our lives are being carried over. So perfect. That's going just exactly the way we want to. But there's a couple of other places where we want to catch what's going on. So for example, at the moment, if I hit play here, we got 1 life remaining. If I fire the ball and we bounce it down, and again if we lose 1 more life, we've lost all our lives, we got the game over. We should actually add some way for the player to continue here. I just realized that we don't actually have anything on this screen. So we're going to add a way to fix that up in a next video. Okay, so we've got our game over screen at the moment, which just lets our player die and nothing happens. But we want to set it so that A of all, it gives us some options of we can start our level again or quit out to the main menu. But B of all, we want to make sure that it resets the values that we have stored for our current score and our current lives. So let's first of all activate our game over screen, and we'll zoom out so that we can see it all. And then I'm going to add a button as a child of this. So actually as a child of the text here, we're going to create a new UI button. I'll move it into the center here. And then on that button, I'm going to make it say, we'll make it say restart. I just realized it didn't actually create as a child of our canvas object here. So I'm going to drag this up so it's a child of the text just there. And then I'm going to duplicate this button. And I'm going to move it down a little bit. Oh no, not the text. I want to move the whole button down. I just realized. There we go. And then we want to change the name on this one to say quit to main menu. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our 2 buttons there, and basically we want to be able to do both of these things when we run our game. So to do that, we're obviously going to need a script that can control this menu. So let's go into our scripts folder, and we're going to create a new C# script that we'll call game over screen. And we're going to give this some basic functions, much like we've done before. we want to be able to load into our main menu and load into our or sorry, not load into, but restart our game. So we're going to obviously include our Unity engine dot scene management, because again we need to be able to use our scene management to load up games. And then we're going to need the name of our main menu, although actually, again, as we did before, we can just hard code our main menu name because we know that's not going to change whenever we do anything. Okay, so we're not going to need our start and our update functions because we're not going to do anything with them, but we are going to need a public void restart level, and we're going to need a public void quit to main. So in our quit to main, we'll need to make it go into our scene manager and load the scene main menu, just like that. But in our restart level, what we want to do is set our initial starting values back to being what they should be. So we want to go into our player prefs again. So we want to say player prefs dot set int, and the first one we want to set is our current score, and we want to reset that back to being 0. And then we also want to reset our current lives, so current lives back to being 3. I just realized I put a capital C in there, which we don't want. So now when our players run out of lives, basically what they'll be able to do is restart the level that they're currently on. So say if you have 20 levels in your game and the player gets to level 10, what'll happen is they'll be able to restart the level that they're on, and they'll get their lives back, but they'll lose whatever score they built up. So that'll incentivize players to go back and restart the game so they can build up a big score, and also it'll allow them to be able to continue on and see a little bit further in the game if they want to. So it works well as a way of kind of rewarding the player for getting that far and not punishing them by saying, okay, you only got this far, now you have to go all the way back to the start of the game if you want to go any further. Of course, if you wanted to do that in your own game, that's a perfectly viable option. So you could just not include this restart level function at all and just have one button to go back to the main menu. But the other thing we obviously want this restart level button to do is actually restart the level that we currently have open. So much like we had in the simple tennis game in the first project, we had a button that we could just press R whenever we wanted to reload the scene. So we're going to do the exact same thing here. We're going to go into our scene manager and we want to load the scene, and the scene we want to load is in the scene manager. Oh no, I couldn't spell that properly. In the scene manager, we want to get the active scene, and on the active scene we want to take the name of that, so that's the current scene that's being loaded in the game. We want to get that active scene and we want to load it back up, so we're just reloading the same level over again. So let's test this out back in the game. So what we'll do is I'm going to undo a few steps here. We're going to undo opening the scene, and actually no, I don't want to undo that. I just realized I should have undone breaking or destroying the bricks that we created before, but that's okay. There's not really too much of a problem with them. Let's just redo creating these buttons here. I was going to undo back to destroying those bricks, but that's okay. I can just reset them back up in between videos here, which will be absolutely fine. We want to make sure that these buttons actually do something. So let's go to our game over here. We're going to add the game over script to it. We're going to go to our 2 buttons, create a new action, drag that game over into place, and then on each individual button set them up. So our restart will go to restart level, and our quit to main menu will go to quit to main. Perfect. Let's deactivate this screen so it's not doing anything in our game when we start up. Oh no, I deactivated the button there. We'll deactivate the whole screen is what we want to do. We'll zoom back into our bricks here. just to make it a bit more interesting in this level, I'm going to add some of these back in for a second, and then we'll hit play. Now if I press play, we see we've got a bit of a score. Our lives remain are -1 because we had previously lost all our lives. So now we got the game over, and we can restart the game. It'll reload the level, and our score is set back to 0. Our lives are back to 3. So perfect, that's exactly what we want our game over screen to do. So now that we've added a way for our players to be able to keep track of our score from level to level, wouldn't it be good if we could also keep track of the best score that our player have got? So we want to create a kind of high score system for our game. So what we wanted to do is whenever our players achieve the best score that they possibly can, we'll add that to our list, or add that and store it as a variable, and we can still use our player prefs to store variables even if our players quit out of a game. It's a handy way of just making a permanent kind of entry that will store a particular value. So what we can do, first of all, we're going to create a way of displaying our high score text. So we're going to copy our current score here. So we'll go into our canvas that is having our score text. I'm going to duplicate this and drag it down to here. I'm going to change this to be the high score text, and I'm going to change the text to say high dash score, and we're going to save that. Now obviously we'll need to add this into our game manager to display it whenever our player is playing the game, but of course when we want to first start the game, we want to initially set our high score to be 0 the very first time our players play the game. So let's go into our game, or our main menu script, and when we start a new game, basically here we're just going to say player prefs dot set int high score. We'll just call it high score without the dash, high score, and we're going to set it to be 0. So that's all fine and dandy. Where the first time our players are playing the game, we want to set our high score to be 0. But what about the second time our players play the game? We don't want it to be that whenever they quit out of the game and start up a new game again, every time it resets our high score to be 0. So we're going to add a simple little if check. We're going to add just above this, we're going to say if player prefs dot has key. So basically we're checking to see if our player prefs has a certain key, and if it has the key called high score, then it's going to run a bit of code. But we don't want to check if it has the high score key, we want to check if it doesn't have the high score key. And to do that we can just add a not in front of it. So if the player prefs does not have the key high score, then we want to create that key. So we want to say player prefs dot set int on the high score to be 0. Otherwise we don't want it to do anything. If it already has that key, then we don't want it to affect the high score at all. So now that we have that high score, let's go into our game manager. We're going to create a reference to that high score object that we just created. So up here we're going to say public text high score text, we'll call it. And then as soon as we start up the game, the very first thing we want to do is say, we want to say that on the screen, but we also want to get the value from our high score and be able to keep track of that and use it against what our current score is in the game. So here we can say we want to use a public, or not even public, we want to make a private int that we'll call current high score. Makes sense. And what we want to do then is say, as soon as we start up the game, we want to set our current high score to be equal to whatever's in our player prefs. So we can say player prefs dot get int for high score. And now that we have that value, we're able to use it. So we can say on our high score text dot text, we can make that equal to high score colon space and then plus whatever our current high score current high score, if I could type the right thing in, there we go. Our current high score is, so if we save this and go back into the game, as soon as we hook this up now, we should get our high score starting off with being 0. So to make sure that that is all run properly, we'll actually run this from the main menu, but we're just going to hook up our game manager before we do that. So our high score text, we're going to click and drag that into there. We're going to save this, and we're going to switch over to our game manager, or sorry, our main menu even. We're going to play from here, and now once we play the game, we go to start game, and we see our high score is by default set to be 0. So now if I fire off a ball, the problem now is that we're getting score, but our high score isn't increasing. So let's start increasing that. So we'll go back into our game manager script, and we'll go down to where we're adding score onto the player. So when we're adding score onto the player, what we'll do is say, so we've added a current score onto our score to add, and we've updated the score on the screen. The next thing we'll do is say, if our current score is greater than our high score, so our current high score, if that's true, then our player must have beaten what the current high score is, so we should make sure that that is set to be the new high score. So we will say our current high score is now equal to current score, and we will change whatever the high score text is on the screen. So we'll say high score text dot text is equal to high dash score colon space, and then we'll add on whatever our current high score is. Now, much like we did with our updating of the current score in the game, we don't want to add this into our player prefs at this point, because as it stands at the moment, if our player are completely getting loads of points over and over again, just like we said when we're adding a score, we don't want to be constantly updating the high score of the game again. And also it adds another feature into the game where if the player doesn't complete a level with the highest score that they've got, then their current high score won't actually be saved. So if the player kind of just gives up halfway through, that's not going to do anything for them. So what we can do then is go into where we're loading into the new level, or doing our check to load into the new level, and at this point we can say, okay, now we've got to the end of the level, so we want to set the current high score. So we're going to say current high score like that, and then we're going to pass in the value of whatever our current high score actually is. And there's one other place we want to do this, which is down when we're respawning our ball. So if we run out of all our lives, we want to say, okay, we've run out of all our lives, but our player has gotten decently far, so they might have gotten a new high score but ran out of lives. We don't want to say, okay, you have to complete a level to save your high score. You could also run out of all your lives and get a new high score in total. So here we're going to say current not current high score. We want to set the player prefs. So we're going to say player prefs dot set int for the current high score, and we want to give that the value of whatever our current high score actually is. So let's go back and test this out now. So now that we've hooked up all those various different pizzas, we can let that compile in the game, and once it's finished compiling, we'll switch over to our level 1, because now we've set an initial high score value. It doesn't really matter too much. So our high score at the moment is 0. When we start the game, the high score gets updated on the screen here, but if our player goes, oh okay, I'm not bothered, I'll just quit out of this game, we quit out to the main menu, and now if we start a new game, our high score that we set was lost because we didn't either die to set it or complete the level to set it. So let's test out both of those ways now. We've got a score of 100. Let's just let our player die. And one more. Okay, so we've lost all our lives. Our score was 1200, our high score was 1200. Let's restart the game. Oh, our high score was not set for some reason. That doesn't seem right. Let's go back in here. Make sure I've spelt all these things properly. Oh, I shouldn't be setting the current high score. I should just be setting high score. I just realized that was the wrong thing to be typing there. There we go. Now we've set the right thing. Perfect. Let's go back into the game and make sure that actually works properly this time. I wasn't pulling it from the wrong place, was I? No, I was pulling it from the right place. So we were loading up the right high score. We were just setting the wrong one when we actually wanted to get our new high scores in the game. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to try and get a high score. We've got our high score, but we're going to try and lose all our lives. So now that we've lost our lives, we can restart. And we've got our high score being kept. So to set a new high score, we're going to need to beat that, of course. So I'm going to try and get all of these. Not doing very well. But we want to also test if we complete the level, are we keeping our high score? So we've shown there now we can beat our high score and keep improving it. So our high score value is being carried over just the way we want to. So let's see if we can beat the level now by getting all of these guys. It's not too complicated at the moment. Oh, I died there. I'm not going to hit him, am I? Nope, I missed that one too. Let's try it from this angle here. There we go. We completed our level. We got our new high score. So now when we go into the next level, which hasn't been set up with the high score value, but if just for example, we know that when we complete a level, we should have saved our high score. So let's go back. And if we play the game again, now our high score should be set as 1700. There we go, we got a new high score set at 1700, just the way we wanted it to be. So perfect, we've got our high score system working just the way we wanted to in the game. Okay, so now that we've got our score system in place in the game, and we've got all the kind of basic functionality of the game pretty much working just the way we want to, let's add some things to enhance how the game plays. And one of the most basic enhancements that you can do to any game, which will make it feel a million times better and make everything somehow feel more solid and real, is by adding sound effects into the game. So included in the resources folder for this project is a bunch of audio files. We've got 3 different files here. So we're going to move them into our audio folder in our project. So I'm going to click all of these here and drag them into the game. It'll take a couple of seconds to process them. So now we've got our ball bounce, our ball dead sound effect, and our brick burst. So these are going to be the 3 simple sound effects that we're going to use for our game. So the first thing we're going to do is import them into the game itself, and we're going to actually bring them in as 3 separate objects into the world. So to do that, we need to make sure that if we pick all 3 of these up, we want to drag them into the game, but we want to make sure that we don't drag them on top of any other objects, because if we drag them on top of anything else, it'll actually attach them to those objects, but rather than creating them as individual objects. So I'm just going to drop the 3 of them in there. And you see we get a ball bounce, ball dead, and a brick burst. And what we're going to do then is add them as a child of the ball object. So we've got the ball there. And now that we have them added in as children of the ball, we're going to need a way to be able to actually play them in the game. So by default, when they're added in to any scene in Unity, any sound effect will automatically be set to play as soon as the game starts. So what will happen then is if we start playing our game, we get all our sound effects playing at once, and obviously we don't want that to happen. All that'll do will just confuse our players. I'm just actually turn down my own sound here a little bit, because we don't need that feedbacking into the microphone. So what we're going to do is, while these 3 are still highlighted, I'm going to make sure that they don't play as soon as they're awake. But there's a couple of other little things to have a look at before we move on from these files themselves. So by default, because we set up everything as 2D in our world, our sound effects are added as 2D, which means that no matter where they are, no matter where we place them within the scene in general, they won't actually sound any quieter or louder. So in a 3D kind of game, what you would always want is, say, if there's a sound of a bird in a tree beside you, you want that to be spatially appearing to the right of the player. But when we're using 2D sound, it doesn't matter where they are. We want the same sound effect to be equally loud no matter where the player is. So I'm just going to actually move these down slightly so they're off screen. We don't want them in the middle of our scene kind of messing everything up. We've also got a couple of other options. We can adjust the volume of each individual one. We can adjust the pitch, which makes them sound kind of more squeaky or more bassy, basically, on a simple level. And there's some other options that obviously you can play around with yourself and see what you get. One of the other things is loop. Now, that's very handy if you want to include some background music in your game, for example. You can just drop a file into the scene, set it to play on awake, and set it to loop, and it'll just keep playing the music over and over again throughout the game. But we're just dealing with some simple sound effects, so we don't want them to constantly be playing after our player activates one of them. So now let's take a look at how we're going to actually activate our various different sound effects. And we're going to use them all as part of the ball. So whenever we have a ball bounce effect, which will be played whenever the ball bounces off anything. We have the ball dead effect, which will be played whenever our ball kind of falls into the zone at the bottom of the screen here. And then we have the brick burst effect, which will be played whenever we destroy one of the bricks. So let's first of all set it up so that they're included as part of the ball controller script. So we'll go into our scripts, we'll go to our ball controller, and we'll create some references to these objects. So we'll say public audio source, which is what these objects are. So public audio source for ball bounce. Nope, I just realized that's not how you spell bounce. Then public audio source for ball dead, and then public audio source for brick hit. Okay, so when are we going to play these different individual sounds? Well, we know that for the ball bounce, we basically want that to happen whenever our player hits off a wall. So what we can do is say, in our on collision exit down here, so whenever our player stops colliding with something else, we can add a little thing in here to say ball bounce dot play, like that. And what that does is it'll just play whatever the current sound effect is in the world. The only problem with this is if our ball is bouncing around a lot of bricks at once. So if it sounds like this sound effect is getting played really, really quickly one after the other, what will end up happening is our sound effect will actually get really, really loud and it'll sound really, really bad. So what we actually want to do is every time our ball hits against a new brick, we want it to stop playing and then restart playing over and over again. Otherwise, we'll end up with a thing where, say, if we hit multiple bricks, sometimes it might not play for those bricks. Sometimes it might double up and sound really weird. So what we'll do instead is say, just before we make the ball bounce sound effect play, we'll say, if our ball bounce dot is playing. So basically, it just checks if the sound effect is currently playing. And if it is, then what we'll do is say, okay, ball bounce should stop playing. So ball bounce dot stop, and then some brackets, and then restart it again. So ball bounce dot play. So basically just resets it so it plays it again. And then we hit our close bracket, and then we can say else. So otherwise, if our ball bounce isn't already playing, then we want to say, okay, in that case, start it playing straight away. So we can do the exact same for when our ball hits a brick. So down here we have, whenever we detect that we're hitting a brick object, we tell it to destroy. So then just after it destroys the other brick, well, at the same time we might as well go, okay, at this point we should use our brick hitting sound effect. But we're going to do the exact same thing we did with our ball bounce playing up here, where we'll say if our brick hit sound effect is currently playing, then we want it to first of all stop. So we'll say brick hit dot stop, and then we'll get it to replay again. So brick hit dot play, and then otherwise, if our brick hit effect isn't already playing, well, hey, now you're free to just go ahead and play the sound effect. So we'll say brick hit dot play. So perfect, that works just the way we want it to. But we have one final sound effect that we want to use, and that is our ball dead effect. And our ball dead effect doesn't have the same problems that the other two effects have, because as soon as our ball dies, there's only one situation where our ball dies. It's not going to repeatedly happen over and over again. So what we can just do is say, okay, we've entered the trigger zone for respawning. At that point, what we should do is just go, okay, our ball has been destroyed, so let's just say ball dead dot play. So perfect, we've got all our sound effects in place now, and we've got a way of playing them in all our multiple situations. And we go back into the game here. There's going to be one slight issue which we'll encounter by playing the game, and it's due to how we've set up our ball sound effects as a child of the ball here. But we wanted to set that up as a demonstration of how these things can affect the gameplay. But to start off with, let's go ahead and get these going in the game. Once we start rolling. We haven't assigned the sound effects, so now the ball is getting all freaked out. So let's go into our ball here and actually assign those sound effects to it. So we can go to ball bounce here, ball dead, and then for our bricks getting hit, we've got the brick burst. Let's try this again. It should all work the way we want it to this time. We hit play. There we go. We get different sounds for hitting different things. And when our player dies, we get the explosion sound. So let's let our player die a couple of times. Oh, we died there, but we didn't get any sound effect. Why was there no sound effect in place? Well, that's because we set up all our sound effects to be a child of the ball. And we did this because logically, hey, all these sounds come from the ball, so we might as well put them as a child of the ball just to keep things nice and organized. But what actually happens then is, because when we lose all our lives, we make sure that the ball is deactivated. And when it's deactivated, all its children objects are deactivated as well. So the sound effect is deactivated, so there's no way it can play. So what we need to do is go back up here. I'm just going to collapse all these various things that are open. And what I'm going to do is create a new empty object that we're going to call audio effects. And that's where we're going to place all the sound effects that we're using. The ball will still be able to call them perfectly fine. But now when we play the game, once we let it play, if we let the ball die, there we go. We get the ball dying sound effect on the last time we kill it. So it's just important to note that where you place the sound effects can be affected by different items that you're deactivating. And if you deactivate a sound effect by accident, it'll just not play the way you want it to. So now that we've got our sound effects all working just the way we want to, we're going to add a new kind of fun system into the game and add a way to keep track of a multiplier for our player when they're destroying bricks. And basically this system will work by, if the player can manage to destroy multiple bricks in a row, for every extra brick they hit, they'll get a multiplication of whatever their score would be. So to do that, we're going to add a bit of text onto the screen up here to show to the player that they're actually getting the multiplier. So we're going to go into our canvas here, and where we have the lives text, I'm going to duplicate that, and then I'm going to just drag it down to here, and we're going to change the text that this displays to say current multiplier, and we're going to say x1. So x1 will be the default one. We can't see all of that on the screen there, so we're going to just stretch that across like that. There we go. And then now that we have that in place, let's go into our game manager, and we're going to create a reference to it. So on our game manager up here, we're going to create a reference to that bit of text. We're going to say public text, we'll call it multiplier text. I think would make the most sense. Multiplier text, like that. And then we'll need a way of keeping track of what our actual current multiplier is. So we'll say a public int for current multiplier, and we're going to set it so that this by default is actually 1, and we're going to explicitly state that in the script rather than having to type it in Unity itself. So it's just a different way of being able to use this stuff. And we're also going to set a maximum amount of what our current multiplier can be. So we're here going to say public int max multiplier, and we're going to set this by default to be 8. And the thing with setting it by default here in the script, you can actually make a change to that within Unity. So I'm just going to show an example of that here. So if we pop back into Unity, wait for it to compile, and we'll go to our game manager, and we see we have our current multiplier and our max multiplier. So we've set them up by default to start out as 1 and 8, but we can actually adjust those values just as much as we want to. We can set our maximum multiplier to be 12 if we want to. We can start our players off with a multiplier of 5. We're free to edit those values, but it's just a handy way of setting it up so that if you go and create a new game manager, those values will automatically be added in. So we'll just save this, and we're just going to fill in our multiplier text into there. I should actually rename this to say multiplier text. So on our game manager, we can just drag that into the slot there, just the way we want to. And so then in our game manager, we want to obviously have a way of displaying that out to the player. We're going to have that be updated by the ball whenever it hits against the brick. But to be able to update it within our game manager, we're going to need a function to do that. So we're going to go down here, and we're going to say public void add multiplier, like that. And we're going to say, okay, if we're adding a multiplier, we must have hit a nice brick. So we can say our current multiplier plus equals 1. So we're adding 1 onto it. Then we'll do a check and see if our current multiplier is greater than our max multiplier. So if our player has got this multiplier going too high, we can say, okay, if that's true, then we want to reset our current multiplier back to being equal to the maximum multiplier, because we don't want players running away and getting like multipliers of, I don't know, 20 to 25 and getting their scores crazily high. We kind of want to be able to control that a little bit. So we're saying, okay, our current multiplier is being set to be whatever the max multiplier is, and then we want to make sure that we're displaying that on the screen. So we'll say our multiplier text dot text is equal to current multiplier colon space, and then we add on whatever our current multiplier actually is, like that. So now we have our multiplier being able to be reset, or sorry, to be able to be set. We also want it to be able to be reset. So if our player manages not to be able to hit another brick and the ball goes back down and it hits against the player, every time the player has to hit the ball back up again, our multiplier gets reset back to being 1. So to do that, we just add another function here to say public void reset multiplier. And on this one, all it has to do is say our current multiplier is equal to 1. And again, we need to update the text on the screen to say that. So we'll just copy this line of code and paste it in there. Perfect. So we have our multiplier being updated now. So let's apply it so that it actually does something in our game. And the way we can do that is in our add score function here. All we have to do is say, okay, whatever the score is that we want to add, we want to multiply that by what our current multiplier is. So we're saying if our score is adding 100 and our multiplier is 5, now our score to add becomes 500, and that's added on to whatever our current score is. Nice and simple. So we've got this system set up now, so let's make sure that we can call that from our ball. So we already have the game manager attached to our ball, so we already don't need to worry about adding that in again. So here we can say if the other game object that we're hitting is a brick, well hey, we can just go to the game manager, we can say on the game manager add some multiplier to it, because we've hit a brick, so our player is able to start getting that multiplier chain going. Then the next thing we want to do is say, okay, what if the we have hit is the player. So we can add a check for the player tag. So if other.gameObject.tag equals player. So player is one of the default tags included within Unity, and we can go ahead and add that onto the player himself. Although it hasn't got that just yet, we can go down here and say, wait for it to compile, there we go. We can go to our paddle, which is basically what represents the player, and we can go to the tags and go down to player here and add that as one of the tags, so we don't have to go through the hassle of creating a new tag for it. So basically what we're saying now is if the other tag is the player, actually I'm sitting here thinking about it, and it would probably make more sense to have it so that we're checking if the other tag isn't the player. Instead of rewarding the player punishing the player for having to bounce the ball back up, what we should do is reward the player for managing to keep the chain going by bouncing it without hitting against the wall. So what we're saying here is if the other game object isn't the player, and we'll also say if, we'll make this an else if statement. So we're saying if the other object is a brick, then do all this. Otherwise, if it isn't the player, so then the only other option is if it's the walls at the side, or no, that's the only other option. If it's the walls at the side, then what we'll do is at this point we'll reset the multiplier. So if the other object tag isn't the player, so if we're hitting the wall, we can say, okay, on the game manager, we will call reset multiplier. Like that. And that's all fine and dandy, but there's one other thing we want to do, which is whenever we enter the zone of resetting the ball, we want to make sure that we reset the multiplier at the exact same time, because we don't want our players being able to kill themselves and keep a multiplier going. So we'll say here, on the general manager, or the game manager, we'll call the reset multiplier function. Perfect. Okay, we'll save that. We'll go back into Unity, let that compile, and we should be able to now see the multiplier in action. Oh, we have an error on the screen on ball controller line 77. Oh, yes. We can't say if not other. What we say instead is if the other tag is not equal to player. That's a completely different thing. It's the only situation where not has to actually go into place when we're kind of doing this logic on if statements. But if we save this and go back into the game, we shouldn't have any other errors. There we go, perfect. So now we can play it, and we should be able to see our multiplier in action. So we'll still only see each brick being worth whatever its value is. But there you go, you can see our multiplier going up when we hit a brick, and then going back down when we hit a wall. So then at this point it becomes a matter of skill, and if you have more bricks in your level, it's going to be obviously easier for your players to build up that multiplier. But now you can see suddenly our high score is a lot higher than it would have been just by getting all those objects by themselves, and it's a lot more sensible and it works a lot better for our players, and it kind of gives them an incentive to try and think about their shots, not just react instantly in the moment. One final little bit of a gameplay improvement we want to add into the game is to add the ability for our ball to kind of go at different random directions when we start firing. So at the moment, every time we fire the ball off, it only goes up to the right. It's because we're giving it the same value to go up and the same value to go to the right. And that's all fine and dandy, that works perfectly fine. If you're happy with it going in that way, keep going the exact same way in your own game. But we could also add the ability for it to randomly fire off in different directions, which will add a bit of kind of variety into the game, and it means the same strategy won't work every single time for every single level. Now, you might want your ball only to go directly straight up as soon as the level starts. That would make perfect sense too. And like I said, go ahead and do that in your own way if you want to. But what we're going to do now is just make sure that we can actually make it completely random. So every time we're firing the ball is at this point here when we set the vertical speed on the x-axis and the vertical speed on the right axis, or sorry, on the y-axis. And like I said, if you wanted your ball to go straight up, what you do is set it to be 0 on the x-axis, and then whatever vertical speed you want it to be going straight up. So that'll be fine and dandy, but we wanted it to go in a random direction from left to right. We wanted to still go up at vertical speed. We wanted to be able to go up at the full speed it should be going, but we wanted to be kind of random between going to the left or going to the right. And to do that, we can use a function built into Unity. So I'm going to delete our vertical speed here, and we're going to use a function called random.range. And random.range basically goes and picks a random number between two given points. So we start off by giving it a first point. So our first point that we'll use, or the first value that we'll use, will be making it go to the left. So we'll say minus vertical speed. And the next value we'll give it is all the way to the right. So we'll say vert speed. So our vertical speed at the moment, I believe off the top of my head, is 5, isn't it? If we go back to our ball, yes, our vertical speed is 5. So basically what it'll do is it'll pick a random number between -5 and 5. And it won't necessarily be a whole number. It can be any because it's a float value, it can be any point in between. So it could be -2.7654, who knows, or +1 or +3.7, whatever. So I'm going to save this and we'll pop back into the game. It's a very simple little change, but suddenly it makes the game feel very different. So whereas before we were always able to know that, hey, if we don't move, we're going to destroy these first 2 bricks here. Now, when we start the game going, we just have to react to whatever happens. So we can hit play. Coincidentally, it just happened to go almost the exact same direction. But there we go, we can now play, and it just happened to go straight up. If we play again, hey, it just happened to go completely the other direction. But there's no rhyme or reason, there's no constant way to how those numbers are picked. It'll just completely random. Every time we fire, it'll go somewhere between going to the left and going to the right. So perfect, we've got that in place just the way we want it to. Now we've got all the systems in place in the game, and specifically we got them all in place in our level 1. Our level 2 that we currently have in use is completely useless to it. So I'm going to delete that level 2 from the game. Just going to process it for a second, and then we've got our level 1. I'm going to save our current level 1 now as level 2. As I did before, I'm going to make it slightly different just by moving one of these bricks down. We'll move the green one down again. For some reason that is apparently my favorite one to move, just to make it stand out a little bit. But now our level 2 will actually be able to carry over all the stuff we previously had it doing. So we'll be able to keep our high score, we'll be able to keep our multiplier going, we'll be able to keep all our sound effects playing just the way we want them to. We need to make sure and we add that into our build again. Oh, it's actually still remaining in here by default just because there was previously a level 2 in here. So that's perfectly fine, we're happy enough with that. And that's all fine and dandy. So we've set up this kind of basic level 2. That's grand. For the purposes of this little bit of a tutorial, I haven't done anything more to it. But as a challenge to yourself, what you should set out and do now is create multiple levels in our game and make it so that they have different designs, different color patterns, and make it so that it's a little bit more interesting for yourself to play. And I'm looking forward at the end of all of these projects seeing your own submissions of how you have carried out these levels. So now that we've got a couple of different levels set up, we're going to go ahead and look at how to create a victory screen for when our player completes all the levels in the game. So we're going to set up a victory screen for when our player beats all the levels. And that's going to take the form of a completely new scene. So we're going to go to File, a New Scene, and we're going to basically just create a simple canvas in this world. So we're going to create a UI, and it's going to have a bit of text on it. So now we have this in place. We're going to scroll and zoom out. I'm going to grab this bit of default text that's in place, and we're going to make it white so that we can see it properly. And I'm going to make the font size quite a bit bigger. We can't see it there now, but I need to make this bit of text bigger too. Put it into the middle just so it makes sense. And then we're going to center all this text here like this. So perfect. And then we're just going to make it say in big letters, congratulations. Whoop, that should have an S on it there. We'll make it a bit bigger again actually. So it's taking up a lot of the screen. Make our font nice and big like that. If we switch over to our game view, we want to make sure that our background is not this kind of weird blue color. So we'll go to our camera and make sure that's black like that. Then just below our bit of text here, we're going to add another bit of text underneath it. So we're going to add another UI text here. And this bit of text is going to say, so we're saying congratulations to our player. And we want to let them know, hey, you've defeated our game and you also got a certain amount of points. So we're going to say here, congratulations, you beat the game with, we're going to change this so that it's white text, and we'll move it down a little bit to here. I'll make it a little bit bigger as well actually, and center it again. I'll make the font size a bit bigger. So you beat the game with, and then we're going to click and drag it down again one more. Actually, sorry, no, we're not going to click and drag it down. First of all, we're going to duplicate it like that, and then we'll click and drag this copy down. And in this copied bit of text, we're going to say XXX points. And then we're going to create a script that will read from our player pref setting and find out what our current score that our player got was, and it will make that display here. So to do that, we're going to just save this scene first of all, and go into save it in our scenes folder, and we'll just call it victory. And then we're going to go into our scripts folder, and we're going to create a new C# script that we will call, we'll just call it victory screen, I think. Victory screen. And we'll open this up in MonoDevelop, give it a second. And there's two things then we want this victory screen to be able to do. We want our players obviously to be able to load back to the main menu. So we'll do a simple, if the player presses any button, then it'll load to the main menu. Otherwise, the only other thing we wanted to do is, as soon as this scene loads up, we wanted to pop in the right amount of points. So we have one bit of text that shows how many points we have. So we'll create a reference to that first. We'll say, we're going to say a public text, but of course to do that, we need to include the UI part of Unity. So we'll say Unity, using Unity Engine dot UI, and then we can say public text, we'll say player score, and then as soon as this level loads up, we'll make it say, okay, on our player score dot text, we are going to set that to be equal to whatever's in our player prefs. So that's player prefs dot get int, and the int we want to get is the current score. And then we also want to say current score plus a space and points to reflect what we wrote back here in the game. So we wrote XXX space points, and then we want to say however many points we have plus whatever the points are. So perfect, we'll save that. The next thing we wanted to do is whenever our player presses any button, we want to load up the main menu. So we will need to make sure we're using the scene management part of Unity. So using Unity Engine dot scene management, and then in our update we'll check if input dot any key down. So if our player presses any key, we want to load, or sorry, scene manager dot load scene, and the scene we want to load is our main menu. So perfect, there we go. We've got that in place now, so let's go back into the game. We're going to let that compile for a second. I'm not sure if any current score value should actually be stored at the moment. It probably shouldn't be, but either way we might end up with either 0 or a few points in here when we run the game. But let's make sure we hook up this before we do anything else. So on our canvas, I'm going to attach the victory screen script to that. Then for player score, we're going to add the final text box that we created into there. And now we can press play. And as soon as it gets going, we should get, congratulations, you beat the game with 0 points. That's not a lot of points for us to have, but that's okay. And if we press a button, we load back to the main menu. So let's set it up so that we can actually load into this victory screen. So I'm going to save this. We're going to go back to our scenes. We're going to go to level 2. And here in level 2, we'll zoom in a little bit here, but what we're going to want to do is on our, where is our victory screen? Level complete, here we go. So on our level complete, on our canvas here, the level we want to load, instead of loading level 2 next, we want to load victory. And before we test this out, we need to make sure that our victory scene is added into our build settings. So we pop victory in there. Perfect. Now we can save and we can play this level. And hopefully, if we can manage to beat it, we should get taken straight to our victory screen. So let's destroy all of these. Actually, just to speed things up a bit, I'm going to destroy these ones manually and we'll switch back to our game. There we go, our level is complete because there's no more bricks left in the level. We can press any key and there we go, congratulations, we got 1400 points and we completed the game. And there you go, that's everything we need to do in our game. It's all set up. We've got a complete gameplay loop starting from our main menu. Our players are able to play through a bunch of levels, hopefully with differently laid out bricks along the way, and finally once they get past the last level, they're taken to this victory screen and they let them know, hey, you beat the game, well done. And then if they press any button, they get taken back to the start screen to start it all over again. That's perfect, that's exactly what we want. The only thing to be aware of is to make sure that in each of your levels that you're doing, that you make sure and set on your level complete screen that it will load into the next level. And as I said then, I want to see a variety of levels created by people using this system, and you can lay out your bricks in a different way and see how it works for your players. So we've got all this working, the only thing left to do is to build the final game. So we've got our game working, let's go ahead and build the complete package. So we'll go down to our build settings as we've done before, and from our build settings we're going to go to our player settings, and over here we need to reset our company name. So I'm going to set this just to be James. We've got our product name, which is Brickbusters, and in our previous project we didn't set any icon for our game because we had nothing to use, but this time we've got that nice little logo that we're using on the main menu screen. So over here where we have texture 2D, we can hit select here and we can actually select that Brickbusters logo like that, and we can use that as our default icon. It's kind of stretched a little bit weird, but that's okay. When you are actually designing a real icon for your game, you want to make sure it's a square object, but it's fine being that for now. So again, we want to make sure that we force our resolution to be 16:9 for everybody, so everybody has the same kind of way of playing the game and the same visual layout on their screens. And otherwise, you can see our icon. This basically shows you how your icon will look at different scales, but that's perfectly fine. You don't need to worry too much about it. But everything else in our game is now set just the way we want it to. So we've got all that set. So let's go ahead and build our game. So we're going to go to build. We're going to create a new folder here for builds within our project, and we're going to call this Brickbusters version 1. So we'll save this and we'll let that compile, and as it did with the previous project, sometimes it can take a little bit of time. So once it's done compiling, we should get a window popping up with the game itself. Now we can start the game running. Here we'll leave it at its default settings. There we go. We've got our Brickbusters, we can start our first game, and now we can play away to our heart's content. So there you go. That's Brickbusters complete. We've got 2 games complete now, and it's time to move on to the next.